Hi everyone, this is Sam Silverman, Managing Partner of EB5AN. Thank you for taking time to join us on today's webinar. As I'm sure many of you are aware, Trump made some very interesting proposals over the last few days. One of them is this new gold card, $1 million to obtain permanent residency in the US, and a new $100,000 fee for new H-1B applicants. So today we're going to be discussing both of these, their likelihood of implementation, potential issues that the Trump administration may face in actually having them become reality, and kind of how they fit into the landscape and differ from the EB-5 visa investment program. So first, quick disclosure, this is not legal advice. You should always engage your own legal counsel for immigration advice. And Ron Klasko, our guest speaker, is a great option for legal counsel. All right, so a little bit about EB5AN. We're a national EB5 investment fund manager and regional center operator. We work with investors from more than 70 different countries. We've been in the space since 2013. And we have many, many regional centers that cover 48 of the 50 US states. One of the things that makes EB5AN unique in the marketplace is we have a commitment to 100% investment transparency with our projects, providing investors with the full set of documents, the I-956F filing template, and also access to the financial statements for the underlying investment. As I mentioned earlier, I'm Sam Silverman, one of the two managing partners of EB5AN. A little bit more about my background and bio is there on the left-hand side of the screen. And we've got Mike Schoenfeld with us as well, and I'll let Mike jump in and share a little bit more about our company and about his background.
Perfect, thanks Sam, and really appreciate everybody to take the time to jump on the webinar today. Lots of excitement in the immigration world whenever Trump holds one of his press conferences. So yeah, as you can see on the screen, our backgrounds, both Sam and I are from more of the institutional side of the world, working at the Boston Consulting Group many years ago. And after that, I was in private equity. And for the past 12 years now, we've been building our company EB5AN into one of the leaders in the EB5 space. And we've been able to do that through our focus on transparency and high quality deal structuring.
All right, and we also have the pleasure of Ahmed Khan, a senior member of our team and former associate with Klasko as well. And I'll let Ahmed jump in and share a little bit about his experience as well.
Yeah, thanks Sam, thanks Mike. Yeah, happy to be here today. I'm the senior vice president here at EB5AN. And I was lucky enough to have been trained by the great Ron Klasko himself when I started my career. Since then, I have worked at multiple firms doing EB5 and general immigration work, as well as been an executive at two of the top regional centers in the country. So yeah, it's kind of crazy times these days, and excited to be here and share insights and perspectives about everything that's going on in the world of investment-based migration in the United States, and some non-investment-based migration stuff. Sam mentioned about the different regional centers that we have and how we get folks from all over the world. In our regional center, we've also been featured in multiple different publications over the years as a leader in the industry. And then without any further ado, I can go ahead and introduce our guest speaker today, the venerable Ron Klasko. If you haven't heard of Ron Klasko, you will hear his name a lot over the next several weeks, I'm sure, as we continue to get his guidance and perspective over the changing landscape. But Ron, if you want to give us a little bit of background about yourself, take it away.
Sure, thank you guys, I really appreciate it. So I head up Klasko Immigration Law Partners. We're about 120 people just dealing with US immigration issues, and relevant to today, we represent many, many companies, universities, hospitals, and filing H-1B petitions, and we filed many thousands of H-1B petitions. And we also have one of the largest EB-5 practices in the country with 9 lawyers working on the EB-5 team. And we handle every aspect of EB-5. We handle representation of investors, preparing projects, representing regional centers. We do a lot of EB-5 litigation. And my background is that I'm a former national president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and 5 times I was the chairman of the EB-5 committee.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here today, Ron. And you know, we say it a lot on a lot of our webinars. It's really important, and it's probably the most important thing in today's world as we see the changing immigration landscape, to have really competent and zealously advocate attorneys that are going to zealously advocate on your behalf. And Ron and his firm and, you know, his partners are some of the best in the business. So if you learn something from today's webinar and you have more questions, or you want to speak to somebody else in the space, I would definitely recommend reaching out to Ron and his team to guide you in your immigration journey, whether it's EB-5 or otherwise. So with that, let's kind of get started with the meat of today's presentation and webinar. If you're new to the EB-5 space, or maybe if you're just kind of you've been looking at it for a while, you've probably at this point heard about the gold card. And we first saw this introduced by President Trump earlier this year, I believe in February, when he first mentioned that the gold card would be something that he would be implementing. At that time, it was very nebulous in terms of what the amount would be, what the process would be, really what it would entail. And at the time, he even mentioned that it might be replacing the EB-5 visa program. It led to a lot of uncertainty in the market. Since then, things have calmed down a lot. And you know, the amount initially was said to be 5 million, but last Friday we got an update from the White House, did a press conference, and he basically rolled out this new gold card program that came in a lot cheaper than people had expected. It was actually going to be only $1 million for the lowest amount. But Ron, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what we heard in that press conference, and now that we've got the actual text of the executive order, what it seems to entail?
Sure, Ahmed, thank you very much. So as we talk about the gold card, and we're also in a little bit going to talk about the H-1B, there's really three levels at which we'll be dealing with this. One is what we know. 2 is, equally importantly, what we don't know. And 3 is whether all of this is legal and is actually consistent with the law, and whether it's actually going to happen. And both the H-1B and the gold card have in common the fact that President Trump has decided not to do this the normal way, which is either by trying to get a new law passed or by at least having new regulations, but rather trying to do it by proclamations and executive orders, which is a very, very questionable legality. So with all that said, the Trump gold card program, which is different than the original, you know, Ahmed mentioned that they had originally talked about a $5 million gold card where you're not subject to taxation on worldwide income, which was a big deal. They're still saying, well, maybe we're going to do that, but we're going to call that the platinum card. And in the meantime, we're going to do a gold card, which is different. The gold card, you are subject to taxation on worldwide income, just like every other green card holder. And you can do it at $1 million. And they also created a concept that a company can do $2 million donation to the US government and use that to sponsor an employee for a green card. So that's what we know. And we also know that they propose to have these gold card people be, they had to try to put them into some existing group. I'm sure that Trump got legal advice that they can't just create a category that doesn't exist in the law and saying we're just going to do this by mandate. So they thought that their best chance of having this be found by a court to be legal would be to fit it into the EB1 or EB2 categories. So the EB1 is something called extraordinary ability, and the EB2 is something called national interest waiver. And basically what they're saying is, and this is somewhat of a stretch to me, they're saying, well, if you invest, it's not an investment. If you donate, if you give the US government $1 million, we will determine that that is automatically, you're in the national interest of the United States because you've given us this donation. Well, if you can buy that, it's even harder to buy how it qualifies as extraordinary ability, because somehow they're saying that if you're rich and can give us $1 million, you have national or international renown in your field, which is the standard for EB1 extraordinary ability. So I think all of this is very subject to attack in federal court. But in the meantime, we know that the people who do this will be subject to either the EB1 or the EB2 quota. And this is important because there are backlogs in the EB1 and EB2 category, even without adding gold card investors. So in the EB1 category, the backlogs only exist for China and India. But likely, if there's any significant number of gold card applicants, there will be a backlog for the entire world in the EB1 category. In the EB2 category, there's backlogs for multiple countries and for what's called ROW for the rest of the world. So the whole world has already a backlog in EB2. If you're from India in EB2, you already have what I and many other immigration lawyers have advised our clients is probably at least a 40 or 50 year backlog before you add gold card holders. So that's a significant issue in choosing whether the gold card is a logical option for any person. Now on the next slide, well, in order to try to make clear what the gold card is and how it compares to EB5, because that's what, for a lot of people, the decision is going to be made. Do I want to do gold card or do I want to do EB5? So on this slide, I've tried to point out what some of the similarities and differences are. I think, for most of my clients, I believe the EB5 makes a lot more sense than the gold card, but let's dissect it and see how it plays out. So in EB5, in almost all EB5 regional center applications, the investment amount is $800,000. For the gold card, it's $1 million. One of the questions is, if I have a family of 4, does that mean we have to make a $4 million donation to the US government? Or does it mean I only need a $1 million investment and then my family members just follow along? Now, this is very unclear. It's not unclear for EB5. For EB5, we know 1/800,000 investment does include spouse and children. The gold card pronouncements so far have talked about $1 million investment per person getting a green card. So that would mean that the family of 4 has to donate $4 million to the US government. However, that doesn't make sense under the law, because in both EB1 and EB2, family members automatically get the same status as the principal and don't have to do something separately. So how that's going to play out is a big question mark right now. We talked about the fact that right now in EB5, and pretty much since the RIA in March of 2022, there's been no quota backlog. We don't know for sure what we're going to have going forward, but we know as of now there's no quota backlog. And as we've just seen in the previous slide, we know there is a quota backlog in EB1 and EB2 that will only get worse with adding gold card people to the people in those categories.
Yeah, and Ron, I just want to step in here and kind of ask you a question, because you've rightly pointed out that a lot of this whole process is what we don't know, right? So far, we've just got a proclamation, and no implementation of that. And we're going to see over the next 90 days, supposedly, that what those rules are going to look like. And I think one of the key things that we're going to be watching out for is, well, what differentiates someone getting an EB2 versus an EB1 approval with their $1 million donation. But for some folks, it kind of doesn't matter, right? And I think, would it make sense, just in your personal opinion, for anyone who's from India or China to even go for this program? Because what difference would it make, right? If you have an EB1 or an EB2 approval, you're still stuck in the same backlog that they're probably already in, especially if they're in the US with a US employer.
There is a difference between the backlogs. I mean, Ahmed, it's a very good point you made. And I think probably, and we're all guessing here, is that when you file the application and we don't have the form, we don't even know the agency we're going to file the form with. There's some talk that it's going to go through the Department of Commerce and not the Immigration Service, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. We really don't know any of that. But whatever the form looks like, there's probably going to be a place where we can check off, I want to be an EB1 or I want to be an EB2. If I'm from India, I would definitely want to be an EB1 because the waiting list is going to be a lot shorter. But the bottom line is, whoever is advising the gold card investor would want to make sure the investor understands that, unlike EB5, where there's no quota backlog, whichever they're going to be in, one or two, there's probably going to be a quota backlog. And how bad the quota backlog is will depend on what country they're from.
And then not only, the future, kind of the long-term effect of having a backlog that you're getting into, but the fact that you're current in EB5 also allows for concurrent filing and gets you that immediate benefit of kind of securing your status in the US, getting an EAD in a few months, and getting advanced parole as well. So there's a number of kind of, I think, implications that especially for Indian and Chinese investors who are backlogged in those categories, that they should be considering. And then, yeah, to your point, I think even the rest of the world, it becomes very, very relevant to make that differentiation between EB1 and EB2.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's something that we're all going to be keeping a close eye on once we see what the rulemaking actually looks like.
Yep.
Exactly. And at the surface level, when we heard the announcement, we thought, oh, maybe this is a program that could work if it stands up in court, and a lot of ifs. And now that you see the creativity used to try and jam this through an existing program of the EB1 and 2, it's clear, like, maybe the gold card works in a very small subset of people where it could potentially be a good fit. But generally, it doesn't seem like a alternative to EB5. It seems worse in almost every way, is the way that I kind of see it now that this has been kind of released.
Yeah, that's what I'm advising my clients. One of the issues when they first came out with this idea of a $5 million thing, whatever you wanted to call it, there seemed to be some sense, well, you won't have to go through all the source of funds stuff that you do on EB5. I would say almost certainly the gold card will require the same lawful source and path of funds analysis as EB5 does, because the alternative is that the government is going to say, well, we don't care whether your funds are lawful or not. We're going to give you the gold card or the platinum card. I find it very difficult to believe that they would go down that route. I also find it difficult to believe that they'll say, well, we won't check as closely to see if your funds are lawful or not on the gold card. So in reality, I expect it'll be the same source and path of funds analysis and documentation in the gold card and the EB5. One advantage that the gold card has, and maybe for some people the only advantage, is that you do not have to go through the conditional residence. You don't have to get the 2-year green card and then do the 829. That's a benefit. Now, one of the biggest disadvantages of the gold card is that I believe that there's a good chance that it will be challenged in federal court. And I believe that if it's challenged in federal court, there will be a good chance that the federal court will say you can't do this by some sort of executive fiat. You can't amend EB1 and EB2. You can't create a separate visa category without having a separate law. So what does that mean? If I'm an EB5 investor, even if something happens to the EB5 program down the road, I am still grandfathered by law until September, as long as I file before September 30, 2026. If I donate $1 million to the US government and the federal court, as expected, shoots down this program, what am I going to do? I'm going to hope to get a refund from the US government? Is there going to be a provision for refunds if it's unsuccessful in federal court? And by that time, is it going to be too late to do my EB-5 because we're past the grandfather period? So the risk of litigation is a huge issue. Somebody asked me on a call earlier today, well, what happens if the next administration doesn't agree with this gold card concept and agrees that we go back to what the law was? Well, anything that is done by executive order can be taken away by executive order. EB-5 can't be, in my opinion, can't be taken away by executive order because it's a law. It can only be taken away by new legislation, which I think is very unlikely. But that's not the case with the gold card. I mentioned before that taxation on worldwide income was supposed to be a big issue with the original concept, where they were saying that you would not be taxed on worldwide income for the 5 million investment, but the gold card, you are taxed on worldwide income. And the last thing that's important, and for some investors, the most important thing, is when investors do EB-5, they are hoping and expecting that they're going to get their money back at some point with some rate of return. Whereas with a gold card, there's a guarantee that they will never get their money back because it's a donation and not an investment. So those are some of the key differences between the gold card and the EB-5.
So Ron,
Ron,
knowing that layout, what are some kind of examples that you can think of for global investors where the gold card would make more sense than EB-5? Like, what are those kind of couple, like, few examples of someone, you know, where it would make more sense to do the gold card? Like, who's the potential buyer of that, in your opinion?
Sam, it's a fair question, and I'm not sure of the answer, because for the reasons I just indicated, I don't think that this is the best answer for a lot of people. It does, you know, if you do a good job of due diligence on choosing your project, then EB-5 to me is a better option. If, you know, what the gold card gets rid of is two things. One is the whole concept of the at-risk investment. So this is not an at-risk investment. And if I don't like the concept of putting my money at risk, then maybe the gold card is a better option. And the second is that if I don't like the concept of having to go through an I-829, it's a little bit uncertain for me, and I don't want to have to wait and see if the jobs are created, you know, 4 or 5 years from now. I want more certainty. Well, then the gold card, as long as it passes legal muster and is not shot down in court, you know, perhaps gives you a little bit more certainty in that regard. I think at some point, some investors thought that they wouldn't have to go through the cumbersome source and path of funds documentation process. And that still may happen, but it would surprise me greatly if somehow the gold card is going to bypass that. Now, the last thing I would say is they have said that they're going to expedite the gold cards. We don't know what that means. Is that going to be faster than priority processing for rural projects? Is that going to be the same as getting an expedite on an application? We don't know what that means, but for some people for whom speed is the most important thing, perhaps the gold card would be a good answer.
So in summary, it's someone who's not Indian, because otherwise they'd be facing, you know, a huge wait and there wouldn't really be any value in any fast processing. So someone who's not Indian born, who has, you know, significant amount of capital they're willing to part with, and who just absolutely can't have any risk in terms of getting approved quickly initially, and then eventually, having conditions removed. So it's somebody who just can't take any risk of timing or of the green card, eventually getting revoked due to, lack of jobs, and who just wants it super quickly and won't take any risk, essentially, and who has, substantially more than $1 million.
Yeah, I think you summarized what I said well, but there is still the risk out there of what happens if a federal court says that this has to be done by statute or regulation and shoots down the whole program. So even though there may not be risk in my
the whole system, the whole scheme could potentially be undone.
And I expect what's going to happen. I don't expect that I will be the only lawyer out there writing and speaking and telling people that there's a real risk that this will get shot down in federal court. And so people will have to take that risk, which is, I think, a huge risk. Now, there's issues. In order to have a federal court case, you have to have a plaintiff. So one question will be, well, exactly who would have legal standing to challenge this program? I mean, would I somehow, as just a lawyer, have standing? No. If I'm an EB-5 immigrant, do I have standing? No. So there has to be somebody with standing, and that's a question. But probably people in the EB-1 or EB-2 category, which will be prejudiced by adding these additional people, would be potential plaintiffs. So
right, Ron, one thing that I want to kind of just in summary after all of this, it's pretty obvious this was a half-baked idea that doesn't really work the way that it's presented. So what do you think the real goal is here, seeing that it likely is going to be challenged, it's not really being done the right way, it's not advantageous over EB-5 in almost any capacity, looking at all of this? Like, I know this is pure speculation. Like, what's he doing with this? Is this just a media statement? Is this positioning for Congress to eventually implement this and he's putting a first step out? Like, how do you interpret this knowing that it's not that useful as it's written?
Yeah, I interpret this as, they attempted to get the original gold card program, the 5 million gold card program, passed as a law as part of the budget reconciliation process. I expect that there was a lot of negative kickback from people in Congress who, for a whole host of reasons, don't like this idea. And we can spend some time going through what those reasons are if we want to. But the bottom line is, I believe this is very controversial, and they failed in their attempt to get this into the law. And so when they couldn't get it into the law, they figured they would try to do it this way and see if it's challenged. And again, it's conceivable that no one will be out there saying, well, I'm going to spend a lot of money to challenge this. And if it never gets challenged, then it exists. So I think they want this to happen. I think they also want what is now called the platinum card at the $5 million level to happen. But I think what's happened there is that there's immense controversy around the concept of letting people buy their way into America and into a tax-free status when wealthy people who are US citizens have to pay tax on worldwide income. And these people who, under the Trump card would not have to pay tax on worldwide income. That probably requires an amendment to the Internal Revenue Code. So I think the ultimate goal was to get the $5 million tax-free through, but they realized there are multiple hurdles to that, and they thought they might have a chance that this would sail through and nobody would challenge it.
Yeah, I think
the optimism, Ron. I think it's definitely more of a statement, seeing that it's pretty obvious how this is going to play out, or that it's just never going to be used. But I tend to agree with you that the $5 million one with a tax-exempt status is the goal.
That Trump wants, ties together immigration and dollars. And he would like, as much as possible, that immigration be either limited to or predominated by wealthy people, people starting businesses, people making investments, and not to what the Statue of Liberty says. So, this is consistent with that. The next topic we're going to talk about, which is H-1B visas, well, let's make that into a profit-making venture also, by making everybody pay $100,000. I mean, it's all kind of consistent. I spend a lot of my life dealing with EB-5, and one of the good things is it's pretty clear that EB-5 is, as consistent or more consistent with what Trump seems to want, and Trump people seem to want, than anything else in the immigration law. Trump, if nothing else, Trump has put an exclamation point around the importance of investment to U.S. immigration.
Right. I think just everything that he's ever said, and even the gold cards idea in general, it really does. When you take a look at just what EB-5 does for the U.S. in terms of bringing funds into the economy, creating jobs for U.S. workers, keeping our economy moving, and I mean the best example of that is really where the program exploded, Ron, in 2008 when there was a global financial crisis and developers in the U.S. turned to foreign capital to kind of keep their projects going, and EB-5 became the primary source. And I think it's always shocking to people how much EB-5 money has affected their lives. You look around a big city, chances are you're going to see 1 out of every 5 big projects having some kind of EB-5 financing involved in it. So it's prevalent. It works. I think EB-5 works in so many ways. It helps everyone, and in some form or fashion, the investors get a green card out of it. Regional centers exist. The developers get alternative financing that they may not be able to get otherwise. And so it's hard to understand. It's hard to see a situation where the gold card then comes in and replaces it. But I do agree with you that this isn't a novel idea to have some kind of donation to the U.S. government to provide a path to U.S. Permanent residency. We've seen other countries do it, or some form of that. And it's going to be interesting to see how this program evolves. But kind of to your point earlier, Ron, about, well, what he's kind of figured out over his first several months of presidency is that you can't just go rewriting laws, right? Plenary power rests with Congress when it comes to immigration law. And I think that this H-1B visa policy change is indicative of that, because when we first heard the press conference, we heard Howard and Trump kind of talking about what they were going to do. They made it sound like this was just going to be a rote $100,000 fee on every H-1B petition. In fact, I think Howard even said that extensions, change of employers, everyone's going to be subject to it. And once we saw the executive order come out, it kind of became clear that they realized the limitations on the executive branch, and that they could only really have it apply to folks that are basically making their first entry into the U.S. under this program. So, Ron, if you want to speak a little bit more about that and kind of what the text of the EO showed us in terms of what they think this program would basically implement, this new rule would implement.
Yeah, compared to this H-1B $100,000 proclamation, the gold card is a model of clarity. This is several levels less clear than that. And if you want to use the word half-baked, this is shockingly half-baked. Basically what happened is it was last Friday afternoon, they came out with this thing. They said it was effective on Saturday at midnight. And there are people around the world who were boarding airplanes to get back into the US by Saturday night, because otherwise it was going to cost them $100,000 to get back into the US. That's where this all started. Then there was clarifications and FAQs and guidance memos and press releases walking back everything and saying, no, that's not the case. And they're still trying to figure out what the case is. So the concept that an H-1B should require a payment of $100,000 is the only thing that's consistent. But does it apply to people who already have H-1Bs? Does it apply only if they're going overseas to get a visa? Does it apply if they're trying to change their status from student to H-1B? Does it apply if they already have an H-1B and they're extending it? Does it apply if they're changing employers? Does it apply, there's certain categories, universities, nonprofits that are not subject to the H-1B quota. Does it apply to them? All these things, the answer is we don't know. I will give you my best legal understanding of what it will probably be, but the answer is it's at best educated guesses. So what I expect will happen here is, and if we go to the next slide, I want to tie the, oh, no, I'm sorry, the one before.
Oh.
Go back, yeah, the one after. Yeah. So the big question is this legal? And I think most likely it will be found by a court not to be legal. So let's play out what's going on here, and that'll help us answer all of the questions below. So under the immigration law, under something called Section 212F, the president has the authority to place restrictions on people entering the US. And the key word is entering or entry. And if you go back, what is it now, 8 years, when we had the first travel ban under Trump, all of the travel ban stuff was based on Section 212F, and the president could place restrictions on who can come into the US. Well, that's a problem. They are trying to say that this is, the basis for this is 212F, but if that's the case, then it can't apply to people already in the US. It can't apply to people changing their status to H-1B. It can't apply to extensions. It can only apply to people who are leaving the US and trying to enter. So they have a problem with that. And that's one of the reasons that they've been going back and forth on how this applies. In addition to the problem of it can only apply to entries, there's the issue of what is this 100,000 thing? Is it a fee? Well, if it's a fee, it actually can't be a fee, because the immigration law is very clear that fees can only be charged on a basis that approximates the cost of adjudication. We actually have a case, in many of you know, in federal court right now challenging the increase in EB-5 fees. But you can't just throw out a 100,000 fee because it has nothing to do with the cost of adjudication. So if it can't be a fee, I guess it has to be a tax. And the problem with a tax is that Congress has the sole authority to tax. And in fact, this is before the Supreme Court now in the tariff case. So most of you on the call know that the lower court and the Court of Appeals shot down the Trump tariffs on the basis that it really constitutes a tax and it can't be done without an act of Congress. And this could be the same kind of thing. If this is not a fee, then it has to be a tax. And, you know, does Trump have the unilateral authority to impose a $100,000 tax? And I think most people I talk to and I discuss this with think there's a very good chance that this will not survive a legal challenge. Now, just a couple of other things that's worth mentioning. There is an exemption for project or for employers or jobs that are deemed to be in the national interest. So we're going to have to see how that will play out and how you actually apply for that. And one of the big issues, there's two big issues at the basic level, which is, number one is, how do you pay this fee? Number two, who do you pay it to? And number three, who pays it? all of which are completely open issues. If it only applies to entry, then presumably the fee would be paid to the State Department and the US consulate when you apply for a visa to enter the US. But apparently the word out is it's not going to be administered by the State Department, but rather by Homeland Security. But Homeland Security has nothing to do with people outside of the US applying for visas. Next issue is, how do you pay it? There's no mechanism at this point, even though supposedly this is in effect for all applications after September 21. Even if you wanted to pay the fee, there's no procedure to pay it. And lastly, who has to pay the fee? Is it something that the general H-1B fees must be paid by employers? However, is this something that an employer can pass on to the employee who's overseas and have them pay it? Maybe get it reimbursed, maybe not. All of this we don't know. And the last thing I have on the slide is what will be the impact on employers. And I think most employers are expecting this will not pass legal muster and will go away. But if it doesn't, it's kind of total, and this is kind of an editorial opinion here more than a legal opinion, but to me, it's analogous to the Hyundai situation. We all know what happened with, Trump got the Koreans to create a, start a plant in the US, and he's trying to, his whole policy is to get companies to move manufacturing to the US and set up plants in the US. And then when they did that, they, deported all of the workers who were brought in to help start up the plant and train the US workers. This is the same kind of thing. This is at the same time as we're saying, well, we want companies to do business in the US, we're saying, but we're going to make sure it's difficult or impossible for you to hire people to work here. And so what's going to be the logical result? The logical result is US companies, rather than paying $100,000 for every employee, will probably offshore and outsource, which is totally contrary to what I understand the policy of this administration to be, where we want to discourage that. So that's, guys, some of my thoughts on the H-1B fee.
Yeah, thank you.
On that, so Ron, I'm sure you had a exciting Friday night, Saturday, Sunday with the phones ringing, everybody in the office. Have you seen the panic fall off a little bit and everybody just kind of taking a sigh of relief now that the notice came out? And as you said, maybe the gold card is half baked. This was quarter baked at best, to where it's all just positioning, but this doesn't actually impact anybody in real time.
Yeah, so there's still, the panic level, when it looked like we had 24 hours to get our company's employees into the US, was at an unprecedented level. Once they backed off on that, and once we were able to get client alerts out to our clients and talk to them, our firm is having its own seminar on this subject tomorrow. So I think the level of panic has calmed down. It's still a big issue for the H-1B lottery, which requires registering in March of 2026, how this is going to affect that. So there's still consternation and planning that has to be done of, do we think this is really going to happen? How are we going to plan around it? So there's still a lot of concern, but I'd say the best way to put it is it evolved from panic to concern when we passed the weekend.
Yeah, and I think that we've seen something very similar on our side. And so just to kind of tie this into the EB-5 program a little bit, over the last 3 years, we've obviously seen hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are in the US on various visa statuses, but especially H-1B, turn to EB-5 as a form of kind of stability, right? One, if you're in the EB-2 backlog with a priority date, after 2017, you can pretty much just assume that there's no line of sight in your lifetime for a green card. And so a lot of folks have turned to EB-5, sure, as a short-term solution to get their EAD and advanced parole because it's current, but also just as a long-term solution to get their green card and be out of this vicious cycle. And I think that what we've seen over the last week, as the panic has settled and the dust has settled from a lot of the proclamations and rules and uncertainty that came with that, the uncertainty about the future of the H-1B program has continued to weigh on folks who are in the United States. The job market is probably not as good as it has been in previous years. Folks have heard about layoffs or have experienced layoffs themselves. And with these new kind of, changes, no matter how implementable they are, people have really started to look to other alternatives. And we've had a lot of calls over the last week with investors who are just like, what can I do to make sure that I don't have to all of a sudden, at a moment's notice, pick up all of my stuff and move my family back overseas? I've built a life here, I've built a career here, and I'd like to see that through. And I think that EB-5 continues to offer, a great alternative to investors or to individuals at this point who are looking to basically secure their status in the United States. Would you guys agree?
And Ahmed, I definitely think that's right. And one of the things that I've noticed is with both of these programs, again, it came out as a shock, and then you go into the details and it's like, okay, it's not real right now. But I think what it shows is that by brute force in some capacity, we now see what Trump wants to do, and he's been saying what he wants to do with a $100,000 fee, with the gold card of pushing immigration in that direction, which means that maybe it's next year Congress is willing to take this up, or maybe he finds some other angle. So what some of the conversations I've been having is, yeah, this doesn't impact you today, but just generally, if you're on H-1B in one of the lines you suggested, and you want to stay in the U.S. for the people that have the financial resources, EB-5 works. It's current, it's working quickly, and with all of the uncertainty coming down the pipeline, whether it's executive orders or getting into legislation, which could actually be real, unlike this, I think a lot of people just realize they don't want to be playing that game anymore and living by press releases on Friday night for whether or not they're going to be able to stay in the U.S.
Right. Ron, anything to add to that before we kind of wrap things up?
No, I think I agree with what you guys said. I think that there's a very, very good chance that this will not have a major impact on EB-5. I think probably in the short term, there will be people evaluating this as an option, the gold card as an option, but in many cases, I think they'll conclude that EB-5 is a better option. I expect that EB-5 will be quite busy in the coming year as we get closer to the grandfathering date of September 30, 2026. And I think that it's going to be critical for everybody in the EB-5 community to be doing everything they can to start dealing with sooner rather than later the need to extend a regional center program beyond the 27 deadline.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ron, I'm glad you brought that up because that was going to be my next point is, EB-5, as good as it is right now, and we've seen this program undergo so many changes, and under the Reform and Integrity Act, I think we can all agree we've seen a lot of positivity over the last couple of years of, the program is moving through faster. We're seeing approvals on a much more regular basis. There's a lot more clarity and knowledge for investors to base their decisions off of. But one of the things is, we are working on a deadline, and in many ways, it's a hard deadline. So, Ron, if you don't mind spending just a few seconds talking about what the grandfathering clause is that you mentioned that's coming up in September of 2026, and really what that means for investors who are looking at EB-5 as an option today.
Sure. So there are two important dates in the future for EB-5. One is we all know that the Regional Center EB-5 program is what was called a pilot program that is temporary and has to be extended at varying intervals. And this has been going on since, I guess, 93, and we've had countless extensions. The last extension was a 5-year extension that expires on September 30, 2027. So in order for the EB-5 program to continue as it is, beyond that, it will need to be extended. And I think probably all of us on the call would like to see it extended as much in advance of September 30, 2027 as possible in order to get rid of any last minute drama. there's also another very important date that the Reform and Integrity Act put in, and that is a grandfathering date. So that dealt with the issue of, well, if the program's going to expire, will people actually want to invest, not knowing if the program expires, if they're ever going to get a green card? So Congress dealt with that at the urging of many of us in the EB-5 community, and said, as long as you file your EB-5 petition by September 30, 2026, a year before the expiration, you will be grandfathered, which means that even if the regional center program for some unknown reason is not extended, you're still covered and you'll still be able to get your green card. So the result of that is that there will be, looking into my crystal ball, there will be a lot of people who will be filing in the coming year in order to be grandfathered. So if you're ever thinking that maybe I want to do EB-5, there's going to be a lot of pressure on people to do it by September 30, 2026. As I've told others in my firm, probably September of 2026 is not a great time to go on vacation. I expect we're all going to be very busy.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that play out on the regional center side as well. With, you know, as we get, I think it's recently hit people that we're just about a year away from that grandfathering deadline. And if, you know, as we can all kind of confirm, EB-5 is not an overnight kind of process for any investor. Even once you make the decision that you want to move forward, it can often take several months to gather the funds, gather the documentation that is required, and ultimately file the application. So it's not a stretch to say that someone who's just beginning the EB-5 process today, you know, might be filing sometime in early 2026, if not even later. So it's important, I think, to gather as much information as possible and become educated about the program sooner rather than later, even if you're just still considering it, so that you can start pulling that trigger earlier rather than later. Because as Ron mentioned, there's going to be kind of a mad dash. We see it every time we have one of these deadlines closer to that grandfathering date. And the earlier your priority date is, as we get closer and closer to possible retrogressions in EB-5, the better off you'll be. You don't want to end up in a very similar scenario as a lot of folks are in EB-2 and EB-3. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike to kind of give us any closing thoughts that he has, and talk a little bit about the projects that we have available today. And Ron, we'll turn it over to you at the very end for any parting thoughts.
Perfect, thanks. And as you'll see on the screen, one of the things that our company thinks is very important is to have options for different types of investors. So under the new Reform and Integrity Act, there is a big difference in between the high unemployment TEA and the rural TEA. They're both at 800,000, but the projects tend to appeal to different types of investors, because in major cities where you can have a high unemployment TEA, it's a lot easier to find projects, and sometimes they can be shorter duration or just different types of asset classes. Then if you go to a rural area, there's a completely different style of deal that works within those areas. So as you'll see on the screen, we have 3 great rural deals available now. Each of them a little bit different, but with the same theme of large scale projects in rural areas with proven track record, where there's already hundreds of millions of dollars of sales of that exact same product type. And this is the cheapest money to continue the project going forward. And that holds true for Bay Creek, which is in Cape Charles, Virginia, for our Grand Park project, which is right next to the Winter Park Ski Resort in Colorado. And then also for Rocky River, which is our next Coulter deal, being built right outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, but that does technically qualify as rural. So those are the 3 rural deals that we have, all of them with jobs already being created. The Fs are pending, although Rocky River has the prior phase approved, and we expect those any day to be approved. At this point, we have over 20 I-956F forms approved for projects we've worked on post RIA. So unfortunately, the government isn't always fast at processing them, but we know they're coming soon. And then in our high unemployment project category, you can see the 3 deals that we have. All of those are actually I-956F approved already, already under construction, creating jobs, and each with a different flavor, with 2 of them on a multifamily project, 1 on the equity piece of it, 1 on the debt side of it, and then another large neighborhood in an area that qualifies as high unemployment with all jobs created for every investor already. So each one of these deals is a little bit different, and I'd encourage you to reach out to our team if you have any questions specifically on projects. And just like you should reach out to Ron's team to start with the source of funds process and going through getting ready, because one of the things that I like to highlight to prospective investors is don't choose the project first. You should hire your attorney and get going on source of funds and getting the money together, because it can take months to go through this. And you don't want to be left trying to figure out a project, and then by the time you're ready, it's sold out and you haven't even started the source of funds, or you still have months left on that side.
Yep, exactly. So I think we've covered a lot of ground here. Ron, if you want to just give us a few parting thoughts. And then obviously our information here is on the screen for anyone to reach out. We're here to help. Whether you have questions about EB5 in general, whether you have questions about our projects, or if you'd like to speak to Ron and his team about your situation or an immigration question just based on the news that we've heard over the last week, or just get some advice, I'm sure him and his team would be happy to help. So with that, thank you so much for joining us. Ron, I'll let you kind of give us our some parting thoughts, and then we'll end the webinar.
So for parting thoughts, I would say that we are in very turbulent times, and we are in especially turbulent times involving immigration. The gold card and the H-1B Friday afternoon announcements are not going to be the last time that we're going to be having surprising or even shocking immigration news. I agree with what everyone said. It really is probably more now than ever important to have a good immigration lawyer, an immigration law firm that is keeping up with all the changes and can advise you on how these changes affect you going forward. There will certainly be litigation challenging a lot of this stuff, and you want a firm that keeps up with it and can advise you how the results of the litigation will affect your choices going forward. So whether you choose us or another firm, make sure you have a good firm. We're more than happy to consult with people on all the issues we've been talking about. And I'd like to thank Sam and Mike and Ahmed for inviting me to have this discussion.
Thank you, Ron. And I just want to say, yeah, we strongly appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join us and share your wisdom. And yeah, you have our strongest recommendation for any clients potentially considering engaging a high-end immigration attorney. We've interacted with hundreds of attorneys over the last 12 years, and in terms of complicated, current breaking news immigration matters, we strongly recommend clients work with you. You really know what you're doing on all aspects.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yep. All right. Thanks everyone for attending. Thank you so much, Ron, for taking time. I know we are all slammed these days with a lot of investors asking for advice and guidance. So thank you so much for making the time, and thank you everyone for attending. If you have more questions, please reach out to us individually and we'll be happy to help.